Good evening, and welcome to the Hero's Breath podcast. I am your always beautiful host, Matthew Huddle.
Alongside Thomas Jasinski, and yes, this time it is evening when we're recording this.
The recording date is Tuesday, January 1st, 2019. This is episode 11. We are talking about Apotheosis, and I've been sitting on pins and needles waiting to get to this one.
It's nice that we're actually recording this today.
We're not really like New Year's people, we don't really do anything on New Year's. It's completely arbitrary. That being said, it is kind of auspicious. I wrote this one like weeks ago. I worked really hard on this one. There's a lot of stuff in here, so let's just chunk through it.
This podcast, Hero's Breath, is brought to you by my program at the Phi Center. PHI Center, standing in for Primary Holistic Integrative Center. Our focus is just really helping you optimize, just making you the absolute best version of yourself that you can be. Incorporate a lot of the different modalities of healing, integrating breath work and meditation and herbal medicine and supplementation and addressing diet and nutrition, things like that.
That website is phicenter.nyc. And the other appropriate shout out is, of course, to our good companion, James Morano. We're a couple of intellectuals, creatives. We're not really all that technically gifted, so we have thrown it over to our good friend James, jamesmorano.com. Go check him out. He's got a great portfolio. He's got a passion for video and film. He does some really, really great work. So you go to his website, follow him on all the requisite social media. Apotheosis comes from a Greek word which means to deify. So this is the stage in which we are going to be raising the hero to a godlike level, to make divine. And this is the stage where we have the culminations of the lessons that are actually learned from the journey, especially when it comes to the reconciliation with the hero's shadow self. That's why apotheosis has to come after atonement with the Father. Like we've talked about before, like in some stories, like you'll see kind of things mixed about. You'll see the supernatural aid return several times, and different mentors, and these two can't be mixed. You can only reach that divinity after you've dealt with your shadow self, after you've had the temptations and you've come through them, after you've had enough trials, this is really where everything clicks for the hero. One of the best examples of the use of this motif is in The Matrix, of course. It's not a specifically religious film, even though the religious symbolism is very, very obvious.
Oh yeah, no, like you say, it's not particularly a religious film, but I think it's so heavily dense in religion.
Religious symbolism, I would say.
Symbolism, absolutely.
Or it was using those motifs from Christian mythology or Christian religion and bringing that, to bear and actually putting it forward in really practical terms, I think, for the audience.
I guess how you also choose to define religion, anything really, even science, is a religion.
Yeah, so Neo, of course, was meant to symbolize the Christ consciousness. And Dr. Peterson brings this out a lot. He's often said that he's accused of using Christian mythology, Christian symbolism, talk about Jesus a lot in his lectures. But the way he always explains it is that Christian belief is one that exemplifies how an ideological death and rebirth scenario is essential to our personal development, which The Matrix really, I think, takes to heart very, very well. More than just the religious symbolism, it uses the symbolism of the symbolism to express it symbolically in the film. Yeah. Say that 3 times fast. But what happens is, in that action, we relieve ourselves of our old earthly identity to one that is closer to divinity, at least as fallible human creatures that we could be. The ritual of baptism is great, at which point the candidate is physically swallowed up by the water, which is symbolic of the grave itself.
I like this whole apotheosis idea because even though it is its own thing, I see elements of it play itself out throughout the journey. And like the belly of the whale scenario.
Yeah. There was a death and rebirth in that.
It's on you and I right now to try to hash out and maybe piece together why this is different or it's unique and deserves its own kind of...
Well, I could explain that very quickly, and thank you for bringing that out. When the person is in the belly of the whale, it is a death and rebirth kind of scenario. The only thing that gets killed, the only thing that dies, is the hero's naivete. So it's not a full death and rebirth. The hero still has his shadow, still has his flaws, still has not come into grips with his own power or lack thereof or whatever it is. All that stuff's still hanging over his head. Nothing has been cleansed. It's just simply his eyes have been opened, as they say in Genesis. That's really the difference between the belly of the whale and this apotheosis. This is rising up out of the whole cycle of death and rebirth altogether. In the Christian symbology, again, going back to that, the initiate is then thought of as becoming a new person who's worthy to be associated with God. To all our Christian fans and lovers out there, this isn't unique. Your pagan ancestors have been doing this shit for thousands of years before this. We had the exact same rituals, usually in darker chambers, darker caverns. Even in Freemasonry, the temple, the lodge, is set up like one of these old symbolic kind of caverns where you're going from one side to the other. You're tracking from one side of the underworld to the other. That's what a lot of these things would end up symbolizing.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Egyptian.
Oh, Egyptian was huge.
Mythology, right?
Celtic mythology used that.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's all sorts of tombs that they're still discovering where these rituals took place. Because we always had this instinct. Like we were talking about before, Stan Lee was carrying on the tradition that goes back before we had written language.
Right.
Our ancestors were doing the same thing. These same motifs never die. All pun intended.
It's that collective unconscious. That's why all this is constantly being played itself out. And that's why we see these common themes, not just in our stories, but in our actual practices, our traditions, our rituals.
And in our daily lives. You could tell we're true Jungians over here. So beyond the spiritual face of it, the person is trying to live with a new identity. So in practical terms, in line with Campbell's analysis, this all comes down to maturity. And when we're talking about atonement with the Father, we're talking about finding a balance with authority, balancing our shadow selves as things we don't like instead of just railing against authority. We're learning to integrate it, learning to accept the inevitable, that we will become that authority someday, we'll become that adult someday. Well, this is the moment when the hero really accepts it and becomes that adult. You think about going into adulthood, it's rather traumatic because in our childhood, the world seems capable of harboring magic, and so do we. Not because children are stupid or gullible, it's because they are unbounded, low-resolution potential. As we grow up, all that potentiality starts to narrow down, and all the variables get reduced. Eventually, we start to get a handle on who we are, what we're capable of, and what we want and what we don't want to do with our lives. We can't just keep being potential. We have to actually become something. That's maturity in a long sentence. So we shrink in potential, but we grow in ability. And the child that we are dies in the process. And that's really, if we wanted to end the podcast here, that's your apotheosis. Good night, everybody.
The child dies in the process.
The child dies. It's like, they talk about the inner child. Well, don't worry about your inner child. He's fucking dead.
It's funny, though. That maturity brings you back into that state of childlikeness. But it's a mature variation of that, where it's not ignorant.
Oh my God. You're making me think of something when I was 12. Throughout my childhood, my parents used to host people from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, through the church. Like, they'd come visiting, and my parents, would open up the guest room for them. And we had this one dude from New Zealand, this guy Paul. Awesome fucking guy. Came when I was 6, came again when I was 8, and then I think again when I was like maybe 13 or 14. When I was a little kid, I was Clark Kent. If you asked me what my name was, it was Clark Kent, because I didn't want to tell you the truth. Like, it was all Superman all the time, and then occasionally Captain America. And now I'm kind of like flipped as I've gotten older. When I was 14, he kind of, he started teasing me about always being like Superman. When I was like 13, 14, like, I didn't want that, like, to people to remember me like that way. Now here I am talking about that story. So it's exactly what you said. You had that childlikeness about you, and then it kind of dies for a while, and then you find a way to integrate it as you become an adult, and you just kind of, these are my embarrassing pictures. Look at me. I was a wigger at this time. Look at my giant jeans. I was, by the way.
We all went through that phase.
We all went through some weird phase.
Yeah, dude, I went through my ghetto phase.
Yeah.
I went through my punk rock phase. I never went goth.
I did. Right between ghetto and punk was goth.
There you go. See? And then I did like a 180, and I just went like straight preppy.
It's good that we actually kind of got on this tear, because we're talking about finding your identity, finding your voice, and doing all the stupid things you do when you're a kid to find that voice. The problem becomes when we don't actually really make that sacrifice of our childlike self. We don't actually become the adult. We don't actually do anything meaningful with our time on Earth. If we refuse to grow up and relinquish the grandiose visions of our shadow self that we cling to in our childish fantasies, we're going to languish in a self-imposed hell that we design. Like I had spent many years in myself. So we either remain a lifeless NPC and allow all that bitterness and anger and depression and rage of our unutilized potential to turn us into these villains, or we actualize ourselves and we become the heroes of our own tale. If you want to know what the villains look like, Antifa is the perfect example. These are teens to their late 20s, in some cases 30s and 40s, which is really pathetic. They are a communistic cadre of unwashed, unemployed, angry, belligerent, bigoted, juvenile, directionless fascists, waving flags adorned with a hammer and sickle, and are completely ignorant of or indifferent to the roughly 100 million people who died under the ideology that it represents. I'm really proud of myself. I like the way I wrote that. You wouldn't think that such cartoonish villains could actually exist in the real world.
And to be fair to you don't hold them accountable 100% because you get into it later.
Yeah, you know what? Before I get myself any deeper, let me just continue reading this. They were coddled. I blame Antifa on bad parenting. They were mollycoddled and helicopter parented. They were sheltered from anything mildly offensive or challenging. And that's the key word. They were never challenged. Yes. Not just physically, because when they were growing up, there was that was the era when they went from they in some cases a lot of schools were actually closing up the playground. They've kind of relinquished that, yes, but this is that era. And it's still going on to a large degree, but unfortunately for us, Generation Z seems to be swinging that pendulum the other way.
And the incredible environment that does nothing but deliver comfort. Literally sit on your ass
and have somebody feed you.
Have food brought to your home. Juxtapose that with our ancestors.
The settlers.
Get their ass up.
Yep.
Pick up their bow. Yeah. Pick up their arrow.
Yeah.
Pick up their spear and go bring that shit.
Well, I was talking with a buddy of mine. He's in his late 40s. His older sister's husband, I think he's in his mid 50s. It was Christmas Eve. We were at his dad's house, and the guy was a World War II vet. He can hardly see, he can hardly hear. He was a cop in Nassau County in the worst areas, in Roosevelt and shit for years. And we were talking about the fact that this generation is so soft. Kind of looked over his shoulder, and I pointed at his father-in-law, and I'm just like, and we're soft compared to him. And his grandfather would call him a pussy. But again, to bring this back to the hero's journey, these kids were never really challenged, so they become faceless ideologues who entrench themselves in this thing. Imagine getting so entrenched in your punk phase that you never left it. You got older, new ideas came across your plate, new people that you've met, things that would have challenged your worldview, but you stayed entrenched in that. And that's what a lot of these kids are doing. They become so ideologically entrenched in it, they can't allow anything to challenge them. I use all this wonderful, colorful language to describe them, but I don't really have any real anger or animosity towards them. Right. It's more pity than anything else. Yes, I do have sympathy because honestly, if I was 15 years younger, I would be wearing the masks and throwing the Molotovs. I really, honestly would. When I was a senior, that's where everybody thought I was going to be. I had to face all my issues. Mm-hmm. I had to be uncomfortable. I had a hard-ass father, a very nurturing mother. That combination actually kind of kept me on that narrow because in the one sense, I had my dad to come down on me really hard all the time. And then I had my mom who was just this sweet, loving Italian woman that you don't want to disappoint. So somewhere in between, I just hit the bumpers, but I never really went off the rails. And I'm blessed for that. Like I said in my last blog, that even when I lived in the depths of ignorance, my determination to lead a more meaningful life always kept me moving towards another horizon. Some part of me knew that this is going to be a phase of my life. Mm-hmm. This isn't everything. I always wanted justice, I always wanted better things, but I was willing on some level to always challenge what I thought justice really meant. What those better things for society, for people, for myself, for my progeny, what all that would really entail. I think on some level, intuitively, I might have understood that it's a bit of a moving target. We can't always be so dogmatic on these things. Right or left or up or down, wherever you fall politically, it doesn't matter. I actually talked to fascists online. And at one point, I sent a conversation to a friend of mine who's like a Randian individualist like myself, and I said, okay, you gotta help me out here. I need some grounding to reality because they've made a cogent argument. I never thought I'd hear a cogent argument for fascism, but I'm willing to throw myself into that ideological pool and say, hey, you know what? We keep throwing these ideas out and saying, oh, this is horrible. Is there something of it that we can savor and borrow and pull out of it? Why does any of this attract me? Oh, it turns out that a lot of fascists are about building yourself to be the best version of yourself that you can be. Of course, they do it all for the glory of the state, so it's still collectivist bullshit, but there's something of it that you can take from it. And that, I think, is where people get very scared. I've dealt with the shadow self, so I'm willing to wade into that pool and say I'm not going to get swallowed up in it because I know who I am and where I've been. These kids, they can't even hear a racial slur that doesn't even affect them without going into hysterics. So how the hell would they really confront ideology like fascism and not get swallowed up by it? Of course they're scared. Of course they want everything censored because they don't have the mental tools to say, okay, you know what, I see your point. Maybe I shouldn't be such a flabby piece of shit. I should borrow something of your fascist ideology and go to the gym, which is apparently a really big thing with fascists. It seems like that's really about as dangerous
it's so
as
funny
they get.
Because honestly, I had no idea.
I didn't either, but you think about it. You look at the old propaganda from World War II. When you go through the hero's journey and you're really willing to chop at the things you believe you know, you start to come out a stronger, better person who's able to move and maneuver through ideologies and philosophies and ideas without being consumed by everything, taking the best and moving on.
There's a few things there. Always approaching things with that open mind.
Well, open mind and healthy skepticism, like one in each hand.
Exactly.
That's why a lot of the Hindu gods have like multiple hands.
Part of apotheosis is actually just that. This maturity that you need to approach things with a beginner's mind. The child in you is not programmed, so it can approach things with an open mind to learn and actually, one, have enough awareness around your own biases you've had internalized, not through any fault of your own, but because of the things that you were taught and things you grew up listening to, reading and watching, and the people you were surrounded by. You're also talking about us being able to look at those dark parts of ourselves and ourselves reflected in other people as well. It's coming into contact with that, acknowledging that it's also okay because of all these programs. There's a potential there for some compassion, and then the responsibility that then is forced upon us to then again re-enter the world with this newfound understanding, this newfound lens and perspective by which we then kind of like filter our actions and decisions through.
You said it pretty much more delicately than Dr. Peterson, who I quoted here. This is from the spring of 2017. He was at the University of Western Ontario. He said, "You don't change the world by going and waving signs at people that you define as more evil than you. You look at the 20th century and you think, well, who brought on the horrors of the communist systems and the horrors of the Nazi system? The answer is people just like you." Then he was talking about the fact that people don't want to face that fact and admit to themselves by saying, it's not surprising because the price you pay for wisdom is radical disillusionment and the confrontation with evil, and no one wants that.
Our subconscious almost like picks things out because it knows where we need to get pushed, what aligns with our vision or what should be aligning with our visions and who we are and our values. We perceive more easily, more immediately, and that's why like you'll find yourself gravitating to a Jordan Peterson because there's something there that's calling to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some stages of Campbell's analysis can be altered and rearranged. This is where the hero is going to take stock of his worst qualities, integrate them into himself. That allows him to become like a god because he's going to be a more complete person and become more than just a man, but to become a symbol. And to take all that onto yourself, you have to accept your own faults. And you have to be willing to let them be out to others. It's like the politician who thinks that he's going to run and try to keep all these skeletons locked in the closet versus the politician who's just like, I'm going to own up to my humanity. 9 times out of 10, that guy does better.
Everyone respects him for it because we.
Our president is a prime fucking example of this. Wait a second.
Between, like owning it and being proud of it.
In terms of winning, in terms of going forward, then
But like one reason why people
way,
did like him is because at least they knew what they were getting.
And that's the point: is the hero has to stand as living proof that anyone can endure the pain needed to shed one form for another. It's a painful process. People think, "Oh, I'm not going to survive it." The hero's job is to stand up and say, guess what, fuckers? I survived it. You can too. If you listen to any motivational speaker, Les Brown is a great example. Tony Robbins, Lisa Nichols, they'll tell you their pain story. They'll tell you their road of trials. Some of them will cry on stage because it churns up these memories. What we have to know at this point is that the pain is going to help us shed this form. We're going to reach this highest ideal. So to make sure that humanity's planet is not, as Professor Mackey said in Waking Life, just this endless futile addition of zeros. For me, when I realized I had to leave Market America, start my own brand, I noticed a lot of other things started falling into place at once. Shortly before that point, once I decided to fix my life up, I had endured a lot of ups and downs. Les left our hero. It was time for me to leave my ex-wife's couch and go into my parents' basement. I was just waiting for her then boyfriend to just be ready to move in. So I can come back here, pay less in rent. Yes, I do pay my parents' rent. He's responsible, you scabs. Lick my wounds, save some money, try to build my business. I had gone through a few jobs at that point. I quit the law firm, worked at a car dealership for about a year, got laid off in downsizing. Then it was unemployment for a couple of weeks, and then I found another job at a cafe in like an office building. Before I got that cafe job, I was also working the night shift trucking department at Michael's. So I was working at one point 2 jobs, still not getting by. At one point, I decided that I had to go back to the health and fitness field. Parents were kind of willing to like give me a break on rent for a year. Okay, take back what I said. Just so I could like, you know, kind of get things going for myself, get back into the health and fitness field. Maybe I didn't know what I was going to do, like work just massage, do Pilates, like and everything else. So what I did was I announced my decision on Facebook, and almost immediately a buddy of mine who's a massage therapist gave me a number and an extension of a person to help me get my massage credentials renewed. And she gave me more information than she was supposed to because I don't know, I guess I have a nice phone for it. And then Carolina, who runs Soleil Pilates, where I do Pilates, demanded that I go back to her. Another friend of mine gave me a connection to go work at this massage center out in Comac, Hands on Healthcare. Wonderful place, by the way. I don't work there anymore, but it's still really good. All from one Facebook post. Like, all these people just, you know, my Pilates mentor, she's like, oh, you know, contact this person, get your PMA certification renewed, make sure you stay nationally certified, and like all this stuff is like, okay. It just gets even weirder, and this is why I put all this into the Apotheosis stage here. Because at the same time, I decided to start 2 YouTube channels, More Than a Machine, Monster Health and Fitness. I figured More Than a Machine would be for like mental health and personal development, and Monster Health and Fitness would be for fitness. For a while, I vlogged on both, I did interviews with inspiring people on both, and I tried to find my voice on both. But I soon started to realize I was spreading myself too thin, and I realized I had to start putting things together. And I'm running through the Cold Spring Harbor Hills Trail. I sprained my ankle. It was first-degree sprain. I do it all the time because I kept running through the trail. By the way, these are like 45-degree inclines trails, and I'm still running with a sprained ankle. My earbud breaks, and somehow or other, I end up getting into a conversation with these 2 women. And through the course of the conversation, I figured out I had to kind of drop More Than a Machine and focus on Monster Health and Fitness. A friend of mine, Chris, one of the owners of Mission Nutrition, in July 2018, we were talking about branding and stuff, and he told me he had just gotten a trademark for Mission Nutrition, and I'm like, shit, I didn't even think of that. So he gives me his lawyer's number, and I had one phone call conversation with her. By the end of it, I realized I had to dump Monster Health and Fitness as a brand. It wasn't going to work. So I agonized, obsessed, for weeks over what to change my brand to. She said, you have a great mission, you have a great idea, you have great focus, all that. She says, you just gotta change the branding. Then in August, I was at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo. I did cosplay for the first time with Lauren and my daughter. The irony of the fact that we were divorced and doing cosplay together was not lost on us. Maybe it's because I was around everyone who's dressed as heroes. Maybe because I was in that atmosphere and spending my day really immersed in the geek culture, surrounded by the symbolism. Like, I don't know what it was, but for some reason, I had gone home, and after sharing that tribal connection with everybody, I guess, maybe, the idea emerged from my subconscious like a seedling pushing up through the dirt. The dirt being the layers of mistakes and accrued pain and unabsorbed lessons, and the mission and the name and everything just breached my conscious mind, and Hero's Breath came out. I sent Lauren a text immediately. My hands were shaking. I felt like this swirling synchronicity, and Lauren responds with, yes, that's it. Email my lawyer, and the rest is trademarked history. Why did I say all that? Because wrapping back to Christian symbolism, in 1 Corinthians 15:52, the Apostle Paul says, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Everything that I've been through, all the pain that so many people want to avoid, that I tried to avoid, that I tried to drink away, it all led up to this sudden moment where I was a new person. I had a new brand. I had a new mission. I had a new focus. It wasn't this amorphous kind of thing. As if I'm being honest, I tried to force Monster Health and Fitness to work. It just never quite fit. As soon as I said Hero's Breath, everything fit. And everything leading up to that moment, that's why I had to tell the whole kind of story there, is because it was just this thing and then that thing and then that synchronicity and this thing. It all kind of led up to this sudden moment where I was just focused on something new, but still moving in the same direction. The point. My new brand was the central focus point between the years of the lessons and the suffering and everything else, the decades of unending toil that I will continue to pursue from this moment forward, going forward, everything that I'll be able to achieve with this brand. Each brand that I had come up with was traversing the stages of the monomyth and was allowing for me to create a new identity every time I try to create something, but the brands reflected the transformation I was going through. The More Than a Machine was an affirmation for myself and to the world that I would never be an NPC again. I would never slide backwards like that. Monster Health and Fitness, with its frighteningly adorable mascot, the Jaeger Daddy, was about the acceptance and integration of my darkness. But this one, it's my being reborn, having taken a full deep breath as a new man to become something more. to hopefully extend to my audience as a symbol. Like Captain America, devoted to the highest ideal. I know that sounds grandiose. I want you to understand that there's going to be a quantifiable moment for you in your journey. You're going to just suddenly realize everything will click. You'll see these synchronicities just kind of wrap on you. When I think about it, I get choked up because it was just like, boom, boom, boom. Hey, go to this job. Hey, get this number. Hey, get this, do this. Oh, here's this brand. Oh, you snapped your ankle. Now talk to these two women and like it'll work through your conversation. Like the shit I couldn't have fucking imagined created everything I'm doing right now. And that's why I wanted to take that apart for everyone to show you. You don't really know what everything is leading you to. It sounds like such a fucking cliche when people say, oh, you know, the pain will lead you to the good side. How many times have we said these fucking cliches are too goddamn accurate?
And it's wild because even right now I'm in the midst of that. With that whirlwind of activity, one thing presenting another situation, another individual, and then that connects to this. And then there's like the past 4 to 5 months, I feel like I'm on hyperdrive. Really getting clear about what it was that I wanted to do. So like you getting more focused. The moment that kind of starts to happen, it's quite literally a snowball effect. But I will say this happened on the cusp of some serious pain. This really did follow a very, very painful moment in my life that forced me to actually dredge up a lot of things that were lurking underneath the surface.
Where they usually
do. Address them. I was always aware of them, but like I had to address it. I had to work through it. I had to integrate it. Send a little love there. Be okay with it. And actually tell myself to be okay with it. And not carry some of the guilt I was also attached to those things. Am I saying you're not responsible for all the shit you've done in the past? No. But there is something to be said for the fact that there's a lot of things that we do out of fear and out of all these different things that have been internalized. Giving yourself that self-compassion, really, is what it is. By extension, everyone else.
Well, we have a very myopic lens through which we can actually view the world. Sargon of Akkad was just talking about how we can't really be strictly objective. We might like to be, you know, and then you go down this rabbit hole of, you know, oh, what is objectivity? You know, the things we can measure is just through our senses could be altered, and you go around and round and down and down. Just go with the fact that we are emotional creatures. Our perspective is subjective. We can't put so much on other people to see things our way. We can't put so much on ourselves to see things everybody else's way. Sounds like I'm dancing in platitudes. It's more a matter of allowing yourself to go through the process of transformation. And that's going to now be a theme replete throughout the rest of this blog series, this podcast, because that's what the hero's journey is all about. It's all about development. It's going through this level of maturity. One of the worst things about our society, we don't really have stages where people, like rituals where people get to mature symbolically, ritualistically. A lot of tribal cultures have that. You know, our Western culture doesn't have that. At best, it's, oh, look, you're 18. Congratulations. We don't go into caves. We don't make kids, like, swim through shit. Like, we don't make them go, like, kill a lion. You know what they used to do? In the Middle East, they used to make, like, a 15-year-old kid go out with a spear and hunt a fucking lion.
In contact with death itself, right? Yes. Like, there was the potential, actually, to not go back. I think a lot of the mental illness that we see today is because people don't have this opportunity for apotheosis.
And they don't have meaning. Yeah, exactly.
There's no challenge in life. There's no coming into contact with the darkness within. So there's no evolution happening, and there's a stagnation that builds up, and this persistent immaturity. You know? So you'll have these Antifa individuals in growing amounts, and if it's not Antifa, it'll be something else.
Yeah, Generation Z is giving me hope
because they're now like looking at this, and they're like, all right, we got to do that.
They're watching their older brothers and cousins and sisters, and they're watching these videos of 19-year-old kids literally standing around screaming, and they're so reviled by it. You had said something before that triggered my thought of what Will Durant had said. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create bad times. That's the point, though, that it doesn't end. A civilization may end, but the cycle repeats, because humans are really persistent little buggers. We'll fuck things up for ourselves, and then we'll come out of it. We come out of it stronger. Obviously, the Akkadians were a little harder than us. Just a little. They didn't even have toilet paper. They used their hands, and yet somehow they still lived into the 30s and 40s at the very least. And they didn't have soap either. You gotta consider, these people survived literally eating with shit on their hands. We can't even handle undercooked broccoli. Think about it. How many times has food been called because of E. coli this or that? We can't even handle spoiled food, and people 5,000 years ago were eating with feces on their fingers.
You have the whole hygiene hypothesis, right? It's a good example for what we're talking about, because that is a very physical, environmental manifestation of what we're talking about.
It reflects the internal.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an over-sterilization of the environment. Our internal environment is also heavily sterilized.
That's exactly why we're so weak. People think, oh, we're living so much longer because we have all these advances. No, we have soap. We have soap and we have fences. We have a society where we kind of agree not to kill each other on a regular basis. Going back 150 years ago, none of that was there. Soap wasn't there. Well, soap was kind of there. It was a newfangled invention. We had blood typing. That was cool. Actually, no, that came about in World War I, so just about 100 years ago. We have some of these advancements, yes, but we also have a society where everyone kind of respects the rule of law to a certain degree. It's just the 1 to 3% of people who don't. And of course, there are opportunistic assholes everywhere, but most people are rarely safe. Most people aren't going to hurt each other. So yeah, where does that challenge come in? The challenge, I think, and this is where we have to kind of get back on track, because these conversations are too fun. The challenge has to be internal. And to think back on myself going through the road of trials and thinking back in those dark times, I could get like a clenching in my chest thinking about me trying to consider being a paralegal. Again, not because there's anything wrong with paralegals, because it's wrong for me. Or working in this dealership accounting office. It's just fucking misery, man. I was not in the place that I should have been. I'm these forms and this pressure and these assholes, and
there's a very clear mind-body connection.
Oh.
And so often the body is trying to tell us this shit ain't working, but we're so out of touch with our own bodily sensations, right? So like the clenching in the chest, or like these small little indicators, right?
But just thinking about it, and that's where I want to, we're talking about all the physical differences between our ancestors and us, the mental differences. Our ancestors had to get up before dawn, and by ancestors, I mean, we're talking like people who just live, like Long Island used to be a lot of farmland. People who would have lived here, where my house is right now, this would have been a potato farm or a sod farm or a string bean farm. These people would be getting up before dawn, like the kids, everybody would be helping, farming the land, clearing this, shoeing the horse. Then you got to have breakfast. Then after you inhaled 3,000 calories that you just burned off before you even took your morning shit, you gotta go off to school. If you're a kid. And Pa's still on the farm and Ma's still in the kitchen, and then you come back from school and guess what you're doing? Your ass is back out in the field. That's why daylight savings time was invented. These people had no choice. It was do this or starve. Here we have food stamps and we have Medicaid and we have all these things, maybe a little harder to get for some people than others, but there's always some sort of fallback, there's always some sort of safety net, and we've created this really coddle-tired culture where we don't push ourselves to that nth degree because we know we always have something. Talking about Les Brown, he was talking about how when he was a kid growing up in the 50s, he wanted to be a radio DJ. And he was inspired, even though he was as he says, educable mentally retarded. That's how he was labeled as a kid. And a teacher told him, someone else's opinion of you does not have to define your reality. So he said, okay. And he went with that. If you want success, if you want to do something with your life, you want to find that meaning, that apotheosis, you have to be hungry. And our ancestors were hungry. It worked or it didn't. You worked or you starved. That was really what it comes down to. We have too much to fall back on. Les was just trying to do whatever he could in that radio room. One day, one of the DJs got drunk. He says, I was pacing back and forth like a starving wolf, waiting for my chance to kick him out to get the manager to call on a weekend when no one else was there, and to kick him out of that booth and get myself on. He had his catchphrase, he had everything, he had his records queued up in his head. He was ready to go because he had that hunger. You listen to Grant Cardone, listen to Gary Vee, Ty Lopez, Tim Ferriss, Peter Sage. You have to understand that if you want to get something out of your life, there has to be no other option in your head. There can't be a fallback plan. Like I said, I'm living, in my parents' house. I'm paying very little in rent. I'm in a good situation. But if this all ended tomorrow, do you think I'd give up on this? No, because I'm hungry. To me, if I don't do this, whether I have help or not, then I don't have anything to give my daughter. Because no offense to the entire U.S. government, I have no faith in you. No offense to the world economy, I have no faith in you. I have faith in me. I have faith in what I can do. And if that puts me up to a godlike status in my own head, then so be it. But I'm not going to stop for any reason. And there is no backtrack. There is no, well, maybe I'll get a 9 to 5. Fuck that. This year I'm filing my last W-2. And it will be my last goddamn W-2. I will never file as anything other than at least a contractor ever again. There's no fallback plan but work for me. And if you want to make anything out of yourself, out of your life, you have to know to yourself there is no fallback plan. It is apotheosis or death. You are not going to be an NPC. That's if you actually want to do anything with your time here on this planet.
Wanted to get to where Matt's at, you have to be prepared and willing, and in fact, not only prepared to meet, but seek it out. Seek the pain, seek the darkness, go into the depths and become more familiar with it. You're always going to feel some sort of stress and anxiety around it, but that's the point.
You're always going to feel some sort of stress and anxiety if you're living. If you're not trying.
Then you'll have an opportunity to actually grow. Like all of those experiences you've had that have shaped you, every single one built on the other, and there was strength gained. There was wisdom learned and acquired. That's the point, because now you can rely on yourself and you have a deeper sense of confidence and far greater awareness. That's what's so critical about this stage of apotheosis, is because that, going through that, experiencing that, the hero's journey is always ongoing, it's continuing, and you're going to be continually experience this. Every single time you kind of go through it in some area of your life, well, the next one kind of like, you just went up a step, right? And now you're repeating that. And then, so these cycles just continue
level
to
up.
It's leveling up, man. Like for you to find yourself where you're at right now, to be hungry, well, that hunger was also a result of all of that.
Yeah, because I know it sucks and I'm not going back there.
That's what you guys got to keep doing. Get hungry. If you're not hungry, well, then you're not challenged enough.
And we're not talking down to you. We feel bad for you, man. You have our sympathy, you have our empathy, especially because we've been there. But I hope to all the gods above and below that you find that hunger and you go at it with what Tom said, the beginner's mind. I think that's key. Hunger and the beginner's mind. That will get you into the apotheosis. And like he said, like I said, as soon as you're getting close to that, you'll know. You'll know. You go through that quickening and all of a sudden you're there and it's overwhelming. I can't describe it any other way. I want to thank you suckers for tuning in. Really appreciate you listening. I hope you got something out of this. This was a heavy one, but I promise you it's not going to get any lighter from here. No. I keep saying that at the end of every. It's like, oh, this is a deep one. It's going to get deeper. Oh, this is a heavy one. It's going to get heavier. That's life, baby.
I was say the same thing. All right.
That's life, baby. Oh, dude, that's because we vibe, man. Vibe in the same tribe. Keep your eyes on the website, heroesbreath.com. If you want to read the blog as it is in its original format, like I said, I quoted a lot of it directly because there was a lot here that I worked on to try to bring out the best points. But of course, Tom and I always jam loose and free. Go check out PhiCenter.nyc to visit our beautiful sponsors. Check out jamesmorano.com to see some really awesome work.
And we'll do our best also to provide any additional resources, like things we've personally watched and read. You
just watch the podcast, you watch the YouTube video and see what we look like in all our beautiful glory. It's up to you. But if you go down to the description of each video, everything that we mention here, if we mention a movie, we mention a book, you will have the Amazon link down there. If we mention an author specifically, they'll have their Amazon page, so you can get their entire catalog. And of course, through Amazon, you can get to audible.com. Tom and I both went through a lot of pain to get here, and we're going to continue putting in a lot of work to help you all get further in your journey.
And we'll be embracing the pain right alongside with you guys.
From Hero's Breath, this is Matt.
And Tom, actually wishing you a very happy new year, by the way.
Oh yeah, that stuff.
2019, all right? Like
2019!
We make this arbitrary fun day where we're going to start resolutions and shit like that. But
break them by February 1st.
Every single moment, every single second is an opportunity where you get to make a choice. So start making the right ones.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night, guys.